We're working on Kristen, Arizona here, who's single in her 50s and looking for more ways to enjoy her living to see what track she's on. So if you're a single person, if you have children here, as Kristen, Arizona does, then here are some items to be looking for in your own situation as you go through in your planning. So when we add to planning, we can add to lots of different things in our life by making it more enjoyable and giving us freedom and flexibility and confidence to go out there and live for today. So going through Kristen's situation here, you can see from her initial spot here on their balance sheet or her net worth, you can see how she's allocated across all these different areas. So for her biggest asset is qualified retirement. So those are your IRAs, Roth IRAs, things like that, 401ks at work. And then real estate is the smallest piece of the pie here for her, which in a lot of ways is a good thing, because if all your net worth is tied up in your real estate, you're not planning on selling or downsizing when you get to retirement, then you're really not going to have too much in the way of flexible funds and liquidity to fund your retirement when you get there. So going down and taking a look at some different areas that you should be looking at to see in regards perhaps to your own situation. Some of this could be across the board kind of stuff. Some of it might be specific to if you are single with children in this kind of situation like Kristen is in her 50s. So looking at the non-qualified assets here, these are your cash accounts, your non-retirement investment accounts. You can see Kristen has an emergency fund, which could very well be, sufficient for her. These are if she got laid off, if the water heater exploded, anything like that. That's where your emergency fund comes in. So you should always have some kind of an emergency fund set aside for yourself. Next bucket here are your taxable investments. So in Kristen's case, because she has children, she has a TOD account, which stands for transfer on death. And in this account here, it allows the assets to pass directly to her heirs if something were to happen to her. Would not have to go through her will or probate or anything like that. So in this case, that's how Kristen was wanting to set it up. You see she has about $150,000 in here. This is her flex bucket. So if Kristen wanted to retire earlier than 59 and a half, where you can access a lot of your retirement accounts, this would be the bucket you could go to. If Kristen wanted to help her kids out with education or a wedding or down payment on a home, again, this is the bucket that you can go to. So this is that flex bucket that's really helpful for people in this kind of situation where they're younger still and they might want to do different things. They might not want all their assets in retirement-based accounts because they have other needs, before the next 20 years or 15 years or whenever they might want to retire come along, where they want to have that flexibility. In Kristen's case, she has this universal life policy, and life insurance overall is something that you want to be looking at, especially if you have children, whether you're married or not. But specifically in Kristen's situation, let's say that her children are still dependent on her. How long does she need life insurance? Does it need to go through retirement, past retirement? So life insurance is a big part here if you have children at any point, but especially if you are single and your children are fully dependent on you. The next piece here, retirement assets. So you can see here a 401k that's in a Roth. Roth accounts are great, whether they're 401ks or IRAs like we're going to get to down here. This allows the money to grow tax-free for retirement purposes. So tax-free is really huge. When you compare that to a regular IRA, which grows tax-deferred, meaning that when you take the money out, it's fully taxable as ordinary income here. So for Kristen, having all of this money in the Roth accounts, that provides her a lot of tax-free income that she'll be able to use down the road. You do forego the tax deduction, but tax-free assets down the road, you can make a very strong argument that is certainly a big advantage for somebody down the road. Next here, she has an annuity. In this case, it's non-qualified here. So non-qualified means that it's not specific for retirement purposes. Any of the growth is tax deferred, just like a normal IRA. But this account here, generally speaking, would probably be used in retirement after this first bucket here. So finally here, primary residence. We spoke about how this doesn't make up a huge portion of her net worth, which is generally a good thing from a liquidity standpoint. She has access to everything else up here, so that gives her a lot more in the way of flexibility. She has a couple of different loans in here. You see her mortgage is getting close to being paid off. Total net worth about $940 here. So again, if you're going through and you're looking at your own situation, do you have enough in your emergency fund? Do you have this flexible investment bucket here that's still, probably growing or has the opportunity at least to grow more than a banking type of an account would be able to grow long term? At the same time, it's fully flexible. You still have access to it. When was the last time you looked at your life insurance needs if you have kids? How dependent are your children on you? Does your life insurance time up with when they're actually going to still be dependent on you? And then how are your retirement assets broken out? What are you going to use first? What are you going to use second? And that has to do with how aggressive or conservative it should be. So how we built out Kristen here is she's pretty aggressive overall, but you can see that the last account that you would use is the most aggressive. So, let's say that this account you're going to use sooner rather than later. Maybe this would be moderately conservative as that first bucket. Now this next bucket maybe is moderate or moderately aggressive, and then you kind of keep building out the risk tolerance from there in a lot of situations, because you want it to be as aggressive as you're comfortable with. Certainly, you don't want to go more than that, but at the same time, if you're not going to use an account for 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it might be, that certainly has a huge effect on what at least is appropriate. If you have an account that you need next year, aggressive probably isn't appropriate for that. If you have an account that you need 30 years from now, whether you're 40 or 20 or whatever the age may be, you could very well make the case that aggressive would be appropriate in any of those situations. Once you have that sorted out and you kind of have a better idea of where you stand today, where the planning process can take you is seeing where you are longer term, how that relates to your expenses, your cash flow, and then you could see, well, if I'm good with these things, how does that allow me to change from a planning standpoint? So, you see expenses, you see how the cash flow changes. So right now it's income, and then it switches over to maybe a pension or Social Security, things of that nature, as well as, you could see how much of your expenses are going to be covered by those fixed sources. So you have wages, but then it turns again to Social Security. How far above my expense needs or below my expense needs are those fixed income sources that are kind of, quote unquote secure? Tax bracket wise, how is that going to change in retirement? So you see here, Kristen has a big gap in these years here because she'd be withdrawing from that taxable account first, as opposed to her IRAs or things of that nature here. So once you have a good feel for that, then you can start saying, well, I'm looking pretty good overall. What if I expanded the hobbies I have, or traveled in retirement, retired early, counted for medical expenses, before then? Where the planning process can take you is giving you a really interactive view of, okay, how does that change all this now? How does that change the expenses and the cash flow? How much more of a gap is that between the secure income sources? How is that going to affect the tax situation down the road from when I'm having to take money out of my accounts? So again, things to look at in that first view. If you are, specifically single in your 50s, a lot of it, translates across the board. But, in this specific scenario that we built out for Kristen, single, 50s with kids. And then when you have a good feel for that, where the planning process can really take you is expanding that and saying, okay, well, what if I did A or B or C or D? How does that affect some of these things going forward? So thanks for joining today's Plan Share. We'll have more for you to come.